Conditions May Apply by CinnamonPinecones. Read by Distracted by Books. Chapter 8. What do you have? A knife? No. For the first time in years, Izuku was waiting for the lunch bell to ring in excitement rather than dread. The janitor told him Friday that the lunch lady had agreed to bring him his lunch to the back door of the kitchen. He'd been thinking about it all weekend, and he'd even found a dirty and only partially broken bento box while rummaging through the trash. He'd cleaned it up and fixed it as best he could so that he could take home anything he didn't finish. By the time the metallic ring of the bell cut through the air, Izuku was nearly bouncing out of his seat. He shot out of the room ahead of his classmates and headed straight for the kitchen. When he got there, he knocked like the janitor told him to, and waited. And waited. He was considering knocking again when the door abruptly opened, revealing one of the lunch ladies looking down at him with thinly veiled distaste. She held out a tray, barely giving Izuku enough time to grab it before she let go. "Don't drop it," she said coldly, before promptly shutting the door in Izuku's face. That was probably to be expected. At least she agreed to bring his food out at all. It's more than he ever would have asked for, and despite the rudeness, he appreciated it immensely. He took his tray to the roof so that he could eat in peace. It was kind of cold and a little dry. Honestly, it was not very good, but he gobbled it down like it was the best thing he'd ever tasted. Rationing his food at the warehouse had been difficult, and the weekends often found him hungry. He was stretching his merch money as far as he could, but he knew he would need to find a more long-term solution. Maybe he could find an under-the-table job somewhere, or maybe he could try to fix some of the things he found at the dump and sell them. He'd seen a microwave and a few bicycles that didn't look completely beyond repair. Having a consistent source of food wouldn't solve everything, but it was a good start. His stomach had likely shrunk due to his unusually low food intake, so he found himself full before he could finish the tray. But he'd expected that and packed the rest into a bento to take home. It wouldn't keep long, so he'd have to eat it for dinner. Izuku had put off laundry day for too long. He'd been sleeping on a crusty blanket since Thursday, and it was Monday. He really should have gone during the weekend, but he'd spent it digging through Dagobah Beach looking for generator parts to try and fix the busted one he'd found a while back. As it stood, Izuku was glaring daggers between the gradually setting sun and the dryers. This was taking forever. He'd run straight home after school, grabbed his laundry, and headed straight for the laundromat. But he'd forgotten he hadn't washed his blanket here before, and it was taking forever for it to dry. It was early September, so the sun was starting to set sooner and sooner, and the nights were getting colder and colder. He needed this blanket to be dry to keep warm tonight, but he also didn't want to walk home in the dark and have a repeat of what caused him to have to wash his own blood out of his comforter in the first place. As the seconds ticked by, he only got more and more tense. There were only so many times he could go over his homework without losing the small bit of sanity that he had left. He saw the streetlights flick on out of the corner of his eye, and he willed the dryer to work faster. When the dryer's buzzer finally sounded, he checked inside, and mercifully, everything was dry. Not even bothering to fold his school uniform, he stuffed everything back into the duffel bag. He threw on his hoodie and flew out the door as the last traces of sunlight were starting to leave the sky. He pulled up his hood and face mask to both fight back the cool air and try to make himself as threatening as he could. Izuku was cursing himself for leaving his flashlight on the windowsill to charge. He didn't expect to be out this long. It was pure chance he'd even brought enough pocket change to pay for the 3 whole cycles it took to dry his stupid blanket. He didn't even have the kitchen knife. It was too big to properly fit in his hoodie pocket, and he was scared it was going to cut a hole in it one day. So here he was, walking uptown, by himself with the majority of his earthly possessions and absolutely no means to defend himself, only 4 days after getting shot in a back alley in these very same streets. Great, 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 just great. It was a solid 15-minute walk back to the warehouse, and 5 of those would be in the warehouse district. So it would be fine. Just keep your head down, stay alert, and keep walking. Of course, luck was hardly ever on Izuku's side. He shouldn't be surprised. He was an unarmed, unimposing figure walking through the slums after sundown with 2 large bags. He would have had to have more than just luck on his side to get through that walk unscathed. Only about 2.5 minutes into his walk, he noticed a gangly man had started to tail him. That's okay. Stay on the main streets where most of the street lamps were functional and keep walking. 5 minutes later, the man was only getting closer. They were skirting the edge of Uptown and the warehouse district. He couldn't just lead the guy back to where he lived. He had to do something. Should he run? He wasn't confident he could outpace a full-grown man while carrying everything. Should he try to lose him in the alleys? He knew the streets well, but he had no idea if this guy did too. Plus, Izuku knew quite well that he could just end up finding more trouble running around the back alleys. The decision was made for him when the man grabbed the handle of his backpack and threw him just out of the glow of the streetlight behind a long-since abandoned cafe. Izuku spun with the momentum so he was facing the man and took a few steps back to balance himself lest he end up on his ass. When he turned around, he saw the man pointing a knife at him. Of course this would happen. This was Izuku's life. Of course this was happening. He almost wanted to laugh. Hand it over. Everything. Now, he commanded. Slowly, Izuku lifted the duffel off his shoulder, tossed it to the man's feet, and put his hands up in surrender. Backpack too, Shrimp, he said, as he used his foot to nudge the duffel further from Izuku's reach. He didn't have the money to replace all of this stuff, and it was only getting colder. Izuku was as good as dead, whether he followed the man's orders or not. It was only a matter of time. He wasn't going to just hand everything over, not without a fight, not a chance in hell. Making up his mind, he shrugged his injured shoulder, letting the strap fall off slowly, but as the bag swung, he grabbed the remaining strap in his right hand and used the momentum to swing it forward, striking the man's hand with considerable force. The knife went clattering to the ground, and Izuku kicked his assailant in the shin to distract him as he scooped up the knife, turning it back on its owner, who was cursing up a storm. When the man looked up and saw his knife, now pointed at him, he started to back away with his hands up. After a second, he seemed to realize that he was the one who had cornered Izuku, so there was presently nothing behind him to get in the way of his retreat. Idiot. So retreat he did. Izuku was left dumbstruck at what he had just done for a moment after the man left. He just stood there, pointing a knife at nothing and no one. His mouth would have caught flies if not for the mask covering it. Did he just steal a knife? Was that considered stealing? Was accidentally stealing weapons from criminals becoming a hobby? 2's a coincidence, but 3's a trend, and Izuku was not looking to connect those dots tonight. Once his mind caught up with the situation, he slung his backpack over his shoulders, picked up his duffel bag, pocketed the knife, and quickly made his way back to the warehouse district. Izuku returned to the warehouse and checked the back alley for dumpster jump scare. Given the lack of dumpster jump scares, he assumed she was still asleep. He'd been tossing treats to her every night, and she'd seemingly been ignoring them. But they were always gone the next day. It could have been the rats eating them, but Izuku figured she ended up eating the treats one way or another, so he kept doing it. He didn't have the energy to stick around and wait for her, so he tossed the treats where he usually did and headed inside. Once Izuku had retrieved his flashlight and settled his things back in their proper places on the landing, he finally gave himself a moment to process what just happened. He just reverse mugged someone. What the hell? Somehow he was 2 for 2 on street fights. He saved someone, and he saved himself. That realization had hope rising in his chest. Izuku promptly dragged that hope out back, shot it, then beat it bloody with a bat for good measure. He was not going to let himself hope again. He couldn't bear it. Turning the light out, he bundled himself up in his stupid clean and dry blanket and did his best to fall asleep. But no matter what he did, he couldn't silence the thoughts that told him he had a shot. He could fight. He could save people. He did save people. He could be a hero. 2 instances were a coincidence, but 3 could be a trend.